Hello. Welcome back to STM Narratives. Before we begin, please comment where you are watching from and the time. Let's spread kindness all over the world. In a world filled with judgment and assumptions, it's easy to laugh at what we don't understand. But sometimes, those who are laughed at rise above, becoming more than anyone ever imagined. This is a story of love, acceptance, and a father's unwavering belief in his son. Thomas Brody was a man of quiet strength, a 45-year-old who had never felt the need to conform to the expectations of others. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that framed his face in thick waves. His eyes, deep blue and thoughtful, often hinted at a life lived with introspection. To outsiders, Thomas seemed like a mystery, a man who valued solitude but who carried a calm, welcoming presence wherever he went. In his small suburban town, nestled between rolling hills and the sleepy bustle of city life, everyone knew Thomas. They knew him as the single guy, the man who lived alone in a modest brick house at the end of Maple Street. He'd been a bachelor for as long as anyone could remember, and in a town where most men his age were fathers or grandfathers, that made him stand out. People often speculated about Thomas's personal life. They whispered about why he had never married, why he kept mostly to himself. Some said he was too picky, waiting for the perfect woman who never came. Others assumed he was simply content in his solitude. But Thomas was a man of quiet purpose. Though he had never settled down romantically, he had always known that fatherhood was something he desired deeply. It wasn't that Thomas didn't want companionship. He did. But his heart had always been drawn to something deeper. His dreams of fatherhood weren't tied to finding the right partner or having a biological child. Instead, they were rooted in a desire to give love to a child who needed it most. He didn't just want to be a father. He wanted to be a father to a child who had been overlooked, to someone who needed a second chance. Thomas had spent years volunteering at shelters, fostering animals, and helping out wherever he could. He was drawn to the underdogs, to the forgotten, and it was this deep-seated compassion that led him to the decision to adopt. But not just any child. Thomas wanted to adopt a child who had little hope of finding a family, someone others might overlook, someone whose challenges made them all the more deserving of love. When Thomas first walked into the adoption agency, he was overwhelmed by the choices. The walls were filled with photographs of children, each with a different story, each with a different need. Some were smiling, some looked distant, and others had expressions that spoke of lives lived with too much pain. But it was one picture that stopped him in his tracks. A boy named Jaden. Jaden was 7 years old, with soft brown eyes and a shy, almost forced smile. He had been abandoned at birth and had spent his life in foster care, passed from one family to the next. What made his situation more complicated was the fact that Jaden had only one leg. A congenital birth defect had led to the amputation of his right leg when he was just 2 years old, and he had been fitted with a prosthetic limb. As soon as Thomas saw Jaden's photo, something inside him clicked. There was a depth in the boy's eyes, a kind of resilience that called to him. The agency worker, a kind woman named Margaret, explained Jaden's situation in detail. "He's been through a lot," Margaret said. "Most people don't want to take on a child with physical challenges. And Jaden, well, he's been in the system for a long time. He's had a tough time adjusting." Thomas didn't need to hear any more. He knew in that moment that Jaden was the child he was meant to adopt. The boy's race, his disability, and his history didn't matter to Thomas. What mattered was that this boy needed someone to believe in him, someone to love him without conditions. When word spread that Thomas was adopting Jaden, the reactions from those around him were mixed. Some people, like his closest friend Jacob, were supportive. But others, neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives, were skeptical, even judgmental. "You're really adopting a disabled black boy?" One of his neighbors, Mrs. Miller, asked, her eyebrows knitted in disbelief. "Thomas, this is going to be hard. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "You know, kids with disabilities come with a lot of extra needs," a colleague at his office said. "And let's not forget the racial thing. People are going to talk." Thomas heard it all, but he paid little attention to the negativity. He wasn't adopting Jaden for anyone's approval, nor did he care about the gossip that was sure to spread in their small, predominantly white town. He was adopting Jaden because that was what his heart told him to do. Love didn't discriminate, and neither did Thomas. When Jaden first arrived at Thomas's home, he was quiet, almost too quiet. His small frame seemed to shrink in the presence of this new environment, and his eyes darted around the house as if searching for something familiar, something safe. He had spent so long moving from one home to another that trust was not something that came easily to him. Thomas could sense the boy's uncertainty, but he didn't rush him. He had prepared Jaden's room with care, painting the walls a soft blue, arranging bookshelves filled with colorful comics, and laying out a bedspread decorated with superheroes. But as inviting as the room was, Thomas knew that creating a home went beyond just the physical space. It was about building trust, about letting Jaden know that this was a place where he could finally be himself without fear of being sent away. At first, Jaden was cautious. He spoke in short sentences, never revealing much about himself. He spent most of his time sitting by the window, watching the neighborhood kids play, but never joining them. Thomas didn't push. He allowed Jaden the time he needed to adjust, to feel comfortable in this new chapter of his life. But there were moments of breakthrough. One evening, after dinner, Jaden struggled with his prosthetic leg. He was trying to put it on after his bath, but his small hands fumbled with the straps. Thomas saw the frustration building in Jaden's eyes, the embarrassment of needing help. Without hesitation, Thomas knelt beside him. "Here, let me help you," he said gently, his hands moving carefully to secure the prosthetic. Jaden watched in silence, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and relief. It wasn't just that Thomas was helping him. It was how he did it, with no judgment, no pity, only understanding. "You know," Thomas said as he finished, "this doesn't make you any less capable. You're strong, Jaden. You can do anything anyone else can do. And I'll be here to help you when you need it." Jaden didn't say much, but the next morning, he smiled for the first time. An unguarded, real smile that lit up his face. It was a small moment, but it was enough for Thomas to know that he was reaching Jaden. As the weeks passed, Jaden began to come out of his shell. He started talking more, sharing little details about his life in foster care, about how much he loved reading comic books and watching superhero cartoons. Thomas listened to every word as if they were the most important thing in the world. They bonded over movie nights, with popcorn and blankets, watching action-packed superhero films that made Jaden's eyes light up with excitement. But life wasn't always easy. Jaden faced challenges in the neighborhood. Some of the kids weren't kind. They teased him for his limp, for the way his prosthetic leg moved, and they made comments about his race. At first, Jaden would come home from those interactions quiet, withdrawn, with a sadness in his eyes that Thomas had hoped he would never have to see again. But Thomas knew he couldn't protect Jaden from everything. Instead, he equipped him with something more powerful: self-worth. "People are going to be mean sometimes," Thomas told him one afternoon, after a particularly rough day at school. "But that has nothing to do with you. You're not defined by what other people think. You're smart, strong, and kind. That's what matters." With time, Jaden learned to hold his head high. He stopped letting the hurtful words of others get to him, finding solace in the love and acceptance that Thomas had given him. Jaden grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. By the time he was a teenager, he had found a passion for swimming. The water became a place where his disability didn't matter. In the pool, he was free. His body, once confined by the limits of his prosthetic leg on land, moved gracefully through the water. He joined the local swim team, and soon his talent became undeniable. The same people who had once laughed at Thomas for adopting Jaden now watched in awe as he competed in swim meets, his powerful strokes cutting through the water with an ease that left many speechless. When Jaden was 16, he entered a national competition for athletes with disabilities. The event was held in a massive arena, filled with hundreds of spectators. As Jaden stepped up to the starting block, Thomas stood in the stands, his heart racing with pride. This was the moment they had both worked for, the culmination of years of perseverance and love. Jaden dove into the water with the kind of determination that could only come from overcoming adversity. Stroke by stroke, he moved faster than his competitors, his body gliding through the water with precision and grace. When he touched the wall at the end of the race, the crowd erupted into applause. Jaden had not only won the race, he had set a new state record. As he stood on the podium, a gold medal hanging around his neck, Jaden looked out into the crowd and found Thomas's eyes. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded away, and it was just the two of them, father and son, bound by a love that had proven stronger than anything life could throw at them. "This is for you, Dad," Jaden whispered to himself, knowing that every moment of triumph was a testament to the man who had believed in him when no one else did. The people who had once laughed at Thomas for adopting Jaden, who had doubted his decision, now stood in awe. They had underestimated both Jaden and Thomas. But love had a way of defying expectations. In the end, the laughter of others had long since faded, replaced by admiration and, for some, regret. But for Thomas and Jaden, the opinions of others had never mattered. What mattered was the bond they had built, a bond forged in love, acceptance, and the belief that true strength comes from within. Together, they had proven that family isn't about perfection or appearances. It's about standing by each other, no matter the challenges, and choosing love above all else. And that, more than any medal or accomplishment, was their greatest victory.